Today's rule of retirement is creating more consistency. And so what we're looking here to do is actually take you back to some grade school math where we look at what is known as a standard deviation. So when you look at your investment accounts, a lot of times you and your advisor may be looking at the average returns that you have for a certain period of time. But most of the periods that we look at, no one identifies what is the standard deviation or how much movement do we have away from that average over the year, 5, 10 years that we're looking at. So what we want to do today is understand that the standard deviation is important, but also see how that can impact the returns that we have, especially in this phase of retirement. So we've got two different situations. The first is an investment portfolio that has an average of 5% with a standard deviation of 5%. So the way that this works, this is a bell curve where you take and put your average return in the middle, and then each mark away from that is one standard deviation away. So we've got here in this first standard deviation, which represents about 2/3 of your probability, your return should be between 0 and 10. 95% of the time, your return should be between -5 and +15. And then when we take our bookends here, 99.5% of the time, you've got a +20 or a -10. So we've got a range of returns where our top end is 20, our bottom end is 10, and so the goal here is obviously keeping all the returns there and then hitting this average as consistently as possible. When we look at growth portfolios, typically you're going to have a situation very similar to this where your average long term may be 7%, but your standard deviation is going to be much higher, which means, if we put the 7% in the middle, we move 15% on each side of that. So 2/3 of the time you're either at -8 or a +22. If we move up from here, then you've got a +37 and a +52. So you say those returns look great, but you also have to weigh the downside of each of these decisions, which means a -23 and a -38. So when you're in the growth phase of your life, you have the time to let these returns work out, but you have a much bigger window of return potential than you do, hopefully, in retirement, where we want to get these numbers as consistent as possible and shrink this window down to where the returns are in a range that what we consider is appropriate for the risk that you want to take.